Hello, everyone, and welcome to our continuing day 3 of FCON sessions. Next session is all about the state of ransomware. I think ransomware has been a really tough thing for all of us in the cybersecurity world to address over the last 18 months or so. We've got Ryan Golden here from Halcyon, who specializes in both protection from as well as remediation from ransomware actors. And one of the things that they do is they spend a lot of time actually tracking the ransomware actors themselves and campaigns. And he's here to talk about where they see the state of ransomware in 2024 and beyond. So Ryan, I will turn it over to you, sir.
Fantastic. Randall, thank you so much for the introduction, and thanks for everybody for sticking around for this session here. I will share the screen here, and really what our focus is on Halcyon. We are an anti-ransomware platform, and so just by nature of that, we do a lot of research into ransomware groups. Let's see here. Randall, are we good? As everybody can see, hopefully this screen. Do you see the appropriate one? Let's see. Randall, can you see the screen? We good?
Yes, sir. I'd step backstage. You couldn't hear me, but yes, we can see the screen perfectly.
Okay, perfectly. All right, fantastic. Well, again, thanks for joining this session. We are Halcyon. Our focus is on stopping, preventing, recovering from, and really reducing the time it takes for businesses to come back from any type of a ransomware incident. One of the things that we do on a quarterly basis, and I think the reason why the folks reached out to have us present here at FCON, is we roll up and we analyze the top ransomware groups, if you could call them a top group, but we do organize these groups based on their efficacy, based on some of their notoriety, based on some of the techniques and some of the different TTPs that they leverage to gain access to their victims. And so on a quarterly basis, we publish what we call technically it's the malicious quartile, but it is the ransomware power rankings map. So we will kind of go through the latest one. And the cool thing about this presentation here is this is brand new. Now we've done this quarterly report for a number of quarters at this point in time. This might be our 6th one, I think, that we've put out as a company. But this one is fresh off the presses. So the latest and greatest one, we just released this technically 2 days ago. So it's pretty fresh information here on the ransomware group. So happy to introduce it and walk you folks through it. It's the first time we've given this presentation for this particular report for Q3. So it's a look back. We'll do a little bit of trends. We'll see at the end of the presentation, if we have time, we'll talk about some of the other big takeaways that Halcyon sees from these ransomware groups. So just to level set, ransomware operates very similar to a SaaS company. They are organized. It's essentially a business. It's a very profitable business. There's a few folks that track Bitcoin wallet transactions. The ransom note that is left on the victim's computer, on the victim organization's computer, will have a Bitcoin wallet, since the entire goal here is to divest companies and individuals from their money via Bitcoin and give it to these groups. So there's a fantastic platform and company out there called Chainalysis. They do some really good research on tracking Bitcoin and other cryptocurrency wallets. And last year, they usually put out a report on an annual basis. They were able to track over $1 billion, one with a B, $1 billion in movement directly tied to ransomware campaigns, tracking the Bitcoin wallets from ransom notes. We know that that's a pretty deep iceberg, that there's going to be a lot more than $1 billion out there, but it's a really good level set for what we can see out there. So on average, what we see, it's about a $5 million recovery cost that scales up and down based on the size of the organization. If they're a big multinational versus kind of a SMB or mid-market player, the recovery costs from a ransomware incident do vary. But we also look at a number of other reports that are put out by other companies and research arms and try to aggregate some of this data. To put it in perspective, so we see on average about 22 days it takes to recover from a ransomware incident in the traditional manner. And for small and medium businesses, that 22 days can be can really be cutting it close for their ability to even operate as a business. Some of the larger players, if it takes 22 days to remediate, yeah, it's a pain, it's a hiccup. But ultimately, it's the small and mid-market companies that 22 days might actually put them out of business. We track internally over 200 groups, and I say groups because there's a bit of a mix in ransomware. There's a couple of we put them into four buckets, and we'll go over those four buckets before we jump into the latest Magic malicious quartile rankings here. But there's affiliates, there's the RAS groups themselves, which are really similar to kind of actually a SaaS company and more of a producer of software consumed by the groups. We also track IABs, as we call them, or initial access brokers. And additionally, there's the crypto money launderer or infrastructure, sort of infrastructure as a service companies that might resell web infrastructure for use specifically by cyber criminals. We actually did an expose on a certain actor that we found operating in the U.S. Kind of against Iranian sanction that was providing critical infrastructure or critical web infrastructure for cybercrime groups as well. So there's a number of moving parts in this. It really is a business, but we track a number of these groups across all of those segments. So really, why is it winning? Why is ransomware winning currently? Again, organized like a software company. They actually have surprisingly good, efficient marketing and partner programs. The vendors themselves, the RAS groups themselves, run affiliate programs. They advertise on Telegram. They advertise on dark web sites for folks to join their affiliate program. There's a profit sharing model. Sometimes it's a hard percent. Sometimes it's an upfront fee. Sometimes it's a per install basis, but there's revenue sharing from the affiliate back to the ransomware software maker. Sometimes the ransomware group themselves steps in to handle negotiations if they feel like the affiliate has hooked a big fish. So there's a lot of communication with these groups up and down. Really, it's a high revenue and a low cost of goods type of model. A lot of these groups, the software to obtain is cheap. Initial access is very cheap as well. We've seen initial access for large enterprises average around maybe $5,000 or so. And that initial access will be stolen credentials, logins, abilities to get into a network or organization that the affiliates will then leverage by deploying ransomware from one of these RAS groups. And ultimately, it's proven to be successful. We've really seen this ramp up. It's about 2017 or so. It's really matured as a business. It's matured as a model, and it's still successful. We cannot go a day without seeing a large ransomware, notice that somebody's been breached, that there is, some new ransom demand, and it's really just kind of continuing to grow. So I mentioned that this is really an economy, and the reality of it is it's pretty well organized. The initial access brokers, as I mentioned before, they're really specialists in gaining access, clandestine access to companies, to organizations, but they're selling that access versus exploiting it or using themselves. Now, there's always some type of crossover occasionally between IAB and a RAS provider and affiliate. It's a pretty murky type of ecosystem, and so naturally there is some sort of double agents. There's folks that sit in both camps occasionally, but the best way to think about it is in this 4 or 5 pillar type of model. The ransomware platform providers, or as we call them, and most of the industry calls them RAS providers, so ransomware as a service, really they build the product. So they build the ransomware encryptors, they build the payload, they sell access, they maintain some type of usually a message board, an affiliate program where they manage these affiliates as if they were an end customer. They provide customer support. As I mentioned, also, occasionally these RAS groups and providers will step in at the later stages of a campaign and offer the negotiation service. Some things that we've seen where these groups, again, continue to evolve how they operate. We've seen certain groups that will go through once they're on a system, find cyber insurance policy documentation that states coverage limits for ransomware. And so when they go into the ransomware negotiation phase, which is really a live kind of chat back and forth in the similar vein of a customer service or customer success or web chat type of a workflow, they'll actually reference that we see your coverage up. Your coverage is up to $20 million. Our ransom ask is $20 million. So these groups really start to turn the screws really during the negotiation process as well. The RAS platform providers are really the central hub for all of this economy. The affiliates themselves are the ones that are buying access or entering into profit sharing type agreements with those platform providers. The affiliates, as we kind of look at them, are the ones that are actually executing these campaigns. So they're leveraging buying access through an IAB, obtaining access through one of these initial access brokers. They are leveraging, deploying, and using the software and the services provided by the RAS platforms themselves, and they're the ones that are actually executing the campaigns. Crypto exchange and money laundering comes into play there on the back half after they've moved they've successfully ransomed a company and they've paid the attackers. There's a couple of steps for obfuscation, crypto tumblers, things to try to throw off the trail of companies like Chainalysis who are doing that Bitcoin tracking I mentioned earlier to the crypto wallets. We also see the command and control providers or malicious infrastructure providers. These are folks that may be resellers of a reseller of a reseller of a commonly used web infrastructure platform located in low extradition and resistant to Interpol intervention countries. Web infrastructure that can be torn down quickly, procured quickly, that will be difficult for any type of law enforcement to seize or control. The command and control providers are big and pretty kind of unknown players. These usually operate like legitimate business shells that they resell web services, hosting, email, things like that. But really, their clientele is going to be nefarious characters. So with that being said, and kind of the outlay of the ransomware economy, we have our latest and greatest for our malicious quartile. So again, this is a thing that we do on a quarterly basis. This is a bit of a mixture of open source intelligence as well as some of our findings internally as we look at these groups, as we disassemble samples, as we really deal with these ransomware campaigns as as we come across them in customer environments, as we come across them in services engagements. We do like to rank these. Now, obviously, it's a little bit tongue in cheek, right? These are all criminal organizations. We're not attempting to glorify any of this, but what we really want to do is understand the kind of how these vacuums form sometimes with power players if one goes down and another rises, what some of the techniques they use. A lot of the origination point for some of these groups, if you go back years, a lot of them there's gray area into known APT actors, right? There's definitely some interplay between the advanced persistent threat groups that are nation state associated, affiliated, or even completely nation state driven, and these groups. It's very easy to view ransomware groups as an arson. So in coverage potentially for nation state actions for espionage, if you're then giving that access via an intermediary access broker to an affiliate to burn the house down, so to speak, it looks like arson versus espionage. So we like to kind of track these things. We like to see who's up and coming. These groups are effective. Again, they generate a lot of cash and for themselves and occasionally for other institutions as well. But what we'd like to do is kind of break them down into four main categories. The front runners, and again, this is trailing Q3, so this is not current day. I think we've got some up and coming players that will be front runners for our next malicious quartile report that maybe are in this contenders category today. Killin would be one of those that I would consider definitely a very up and coming front runner. The diminishing groups are kind of on their way down to some degree. A lot of times these affiliates and these groups break up, reform, break up. Some things happen. We saw in particular with Conti very famously had a bit of an internal split during the recent actions in Russia and Ukraine, as the group seemed to be formed by both Ukrainian and Russian contributors, and naturally there was a bit of tension there. Brian Krebs famously reported on some of the leaks from the internal communications from that group, which has given, I think, a lot of researchers additional insight into how these things run, and really again how similar they are to software where as a service type of organization. So um, uh, uh, the we can jump right into it. We can start here. The front runners that we have seen, that Halcyon has seen, again, mixture of OS intelligence as well as internal things. We rank them as such. So probably Akira has gotten a lot of press over the past, as well as Play. And a lot of these groups really do rise to prominence, and that's for a number of factors. One, it can be the decline of some of the other players, Black Hat, Alpha, Lockbit in this instance, and occasionally that can be just faster encryption, faster methods of having a product that is more efficient, possibly than a competitor. Again, these RAS groups build products essentially, or maybe more attractive affiliate offers, or more better reach. There can be a number of reasons why these groups move up and down in our quote unquote ranking system. But really, these front runners have impacted a lot of high profile. They've had a lot of high profile impact. They've been able to generate enormous sums of money that are trackable, and leverage some very interesting CVEs. A point I'll make a little bit, I'll make now, but go a little bit more into a little bit later. There's a fantastic new report by Google's cloud team that they just put out this week, that shows how much more advanced vulnerability exploitation in the wild has been in the past 2 years or so. And a lot of these groups are now leveraging more vulnerabilities than they ever have before. The report, I think, stated something like from first reported vulnerability to exploitation, and exploitation in the wild was something like 5 days. And 5 years ago, that was 30, 60 days plus. So these groups are moving faster. They are leveraging vulnerabilities and finding ways to either find vulns of their own or exploit publicized vulnerabilities faster and faster and faster. And a lot of these front runners have been really at the forefront of speed when it comes to exploiting vulnerabilities, like the ConnectWise vulnerability that we have listed here. That CVE that had a lot of very, very widespread and fast use by ransomware groups. In particular, Black Basta was seen to use it quite a bit, but most of the other firms did, or groups rather, did leverage that ConnectWise vuln. We've seen a lot of movement in the past couple of quarters from 8base, Akira, and Ransom Hub. There's a lot of maybe some play into the Knight group, a former group, and again, these groups do splinter and move about quite a bit. But Lockbit, maybe 2 or 3 quarters ago, was our definitive front runner, and we've seen a lot more come out of kind of play in Akira, those two groups in particular, with in the past quarter at least. There's a note here on the slide that there's definitely maybe some threads between the Conti group and Akira, which would we obviously can't confirm. I mean, attribution for these things is always a tricky subject, but looking at kind of tool marks, variable use, really how they build their software, if we're able to get access to it, or sort of their methods. Sometimes these groups will use a method to put pressure on a victim that aren't used by other ones. Some little small signatures that the groups have may lead us to believe that they were a splinter org or a rogue version of something. So the front runners here, again, pretty well established. They've been around here for quite a while, and they've been hanging around the front runners category for us. Most of these are pretty well known to us at this point in time, and the rest of the world too. Hunters is one that's definitely came out from the Hive ransomware group. Again, really good at infrastructure building, very sophisticated platform. These guys do leverage data exfiltration and extortion. Most of the attacks do at this point use a double extortion method, meaning that the first thing these attackers do once they've gained access is take data. So they don't encrypt the data first. They want to get it off the system and hold it hostage. So if the victim does not want to pay the initial ransom, they will then threaten them a second time with the data store. And depending on the organization, maybe leaking data will result in regulatory actions, fines, a lawsuit by their customers, a lawsuit by shareholders. Threatening to leak the stolen data has really become just a standard signature for any effective group. I think there's estimates of 80 to 90% of every ransomware attack now leverages some form of this, some type of this extortion of the data itself, not just, hey, pay us to unlock the files on your systems. Rosita, we've seen a lot of action on. Again, these guys in similar fashion have been leveraging a lot of vulnerabilities very quickly in once they've publicly been known, and their ability to really exploit vulns has accelerated. Inc. is one of those ones that I kind of mentioned a little bit earlier, where there's a little bit of bleed over, we think, from the affiliate into the RAS platform or an internal group. Some of these are more, if you could call it, vertically integrated than others. Some of them are very distributed, so it varies a little bit, but pretty good representation from them in this latest one. We can talk about some of the contenders and ones that we have seen here pop up quite a bit. Number one, Bien Lien and Killen, I would not be surprised if they weren't in that front runners column the next time that we do this with this type of report, especially with Killen. We have seen quite a bit of them. There may be a rebrand there from another team, possibly the Agenda team, but the ability to develop in Golang and Rust has made them very cross-system compatible. So we've started to see more Linux targeting. A lot of the news around systems other than Windows being targeted by these ransomware groups is usually around VMware and ESXi, but Linux is definitely used as attack points, as lateralization points in part of the process and part of the campaign. And these groups that have the ability to write in Golang and Rust really are able to extend their breadth and their ability to execute campaigns. Bien Lien, again, there was a free decryption tool that was released, but really they've shown the ability to kind of quickly turn a page and not let that stop them, so to speak. Sometimes security providers and security vendors or open source, groups of incident responders might release a decryption tool if they've been able to analyze a sample and find ways, usually of maybe not completely sanitized encryption applications by these groups. A lot of it's living off the land stuff, but some of them bring their own encryption with them. But certain groups will have a decryptor released against them, but usually what that serves as a red flag to these groups to go and look at their code and rewrite it and come back stronger. So a decryptor being released for a group is definitely not a death sentence for them. And ultimately, what we've seen with some of these decryptor tools is they may not take into account the need to decrypt across a wide network. They may be good for a point decryption, but maybe not 10,000 computers on a corporate network. So it still doesn't give the defender 100% coverage there to use these open source or released decryptors. We've definitely seen a little bit of increase here from some of the other groups like Black Suit, Meow, and Dark Vault. We'll keep an eye on them. These groups sometimes specialize in certain industries. There was a time long ago, it seems like, that certain groups did not like to target hospitals because they viewed it not necessarily as off limits due to the potential implication and risk of life or impacting healthcare and hospital coverage, things like that, but usually more in the fact that it brought more heat onto them. There's more investigation into those groups and seeing if people could get rounded up and possibly disrupted. We've seen several disruptions of groups by multi-country law enforcement efforts. But ultimately, it's pretty much a free-for-all. We think now within industries, whoever pays, they'll go after. So not so much the gentleman's agreement that we saw maybe 5 years ago, 4 or 5 years ago. From there, we can briefly kind of talk about some of these emerging ones, which has a lot of interest. Ransom House for sure, and Dragon Force. I've personally been very interested to see where they come from, where they go. Really, Dragon Force's ability to really impact wide damage, very very capable of leaving a wide swath of damage in their campaigns. Some of the other ones might be aligned, like KillSec, possibly aligned with hacktivist groups. We don't really know. I mean, there's people fly the banner of anonymous, when they want to throw the scent off something. So that group has definitely started to evolve a little bit more to keep an eye on. Ransom House is definitely showing their skill set with automation and moving on to platforms with like ESXi, as I mentioned earlier, has been a pretty common target. There's some vulnerability announcements released a while ago that a lot of the groups seem to have picked up on. Very, very briefly, we can talk about the sort of that declining market we think are diminishing. A lot of them, really a lot of them may be part of these other groups. Again, the actual who's in what group and doing what is a bit hard to put a complete stamp on, right? But Clop for sure, we think Clop as a group itself has most likely just morphed into some of the other groups here. Cactus as well, Stormus. So these diminishing groups doesn't mean necessarily that the actors behind them are going away, but realistically, some of them occasionally get rolled up by law enforcement, the individual contributors, if they're in a country that is cooperating, but ultimately a lot of them end up just kind of changing into different groups or joining another group. A really quick look here at some of the, I guess you could call them greatest hits, but there's been a lot of publicized breaches that these groups have taken some credit for. Now, this is public information. This is not secret sauce. If you search for any of these groups, there will be a bleeping computer article about it, or a lot of times for the semi government agencies, they'll have to do a public report on a ransomware incident if they were impacted. Healthcare, really pretty much every healthcare ransomware incident becomes public very, very quickly. So this is not really information that that Halcyon has sourced independently. We have sourced this independently from other publications and also some of the data leak sites. For the double extortion campaigns, the affiliates in the RAS group stand up data leak sites, which have, hey, buy this $5,000 for this database of information. And so there is listings usually on data leak sites. If it's on a data leak site, it usually means that the victim organization has declined to pay for the leak, and so the group is attempting to get some value of it by selling that information on, or if they're particularly nefarious, maybe just releasing it publicly as well. But ransomware as a subject is incredibly fascinating, and it really we see it on a daily basis. New breaches, new leaks, new XYZ hospital or healthcare network hit by some ransomware group. It's really has not been going anywhere other than up. We did see a little bit of movement again with some of the groups in power vacuums form with the Russian and Ukraine actions that were taking place, but ultimately most of it is right back where it was. So a couple of big takeaways we think from really the past, I would say quarter, but really the past couple of quarters that we have seen. I want to mention that Google report again. The Google Mandiant Time to Exploit Trends report that they just released this week is a really good read for everybody. And at Halcyon, we love security reports, and really we're pretty vendor neutral, to be honest with you. So we find fantastic sources of information from pretty much every security vendor that help to shape the discussion around ransomware and help get the word out that these protections need to be implemented somehow. But the latest Google Mania report shows that almost 80% of the active vulnerabilities in 2023 were exploited. So they weren't just theoretical. They were not just sitting there as a thought exercise or a conference talk. Really, it's showing that these groups are exceedingly effective, and they are moving faster. They are specializing in not only finding vulnerabilities themselves, but exploiting ones that are made public by researchers or other sources as well. That time that Google states the time to exploit from a vulnerability being identified dropping from 30 plus days to 5 days is pretty concerning. I think most security teams would be concerned with going against exploitable vulnerabilities with a week's time. That's not a lot of time to add in any mitigation steps. You might not even be able to mitigate against it. It could be such a crucial aspect to your business that we saw with some of the file sharing exploits earlier in the year. That mitigation of migration is tough and long. Testing and rolling out patches, critical patches for security. 5 days is a very short time frame for that as well. So these teams are better at discovering vulnerabilities, writing exploits for known vulnerabilities, and really getting faster in their ability to exploit in the wild vulns. And that's scary, frankly. That's nation state level versus sort of the N plus 30, 60 days maybe that we saw 5 years ago. These groups are getting smarter. They're not getting dumber. They're highly motivated, and they're filled with very smart developers, engineers, folks that are thinking about recon strategies. We're starting to see in the wild use of things like EDR silencer and other open source versions of red team tools or red team tools themselves. And their ability to disrupt the communications or the data flow from an agent on an endpoint back to the management cloud. So really blocking the telemetry from going back once they've maintained access or they've gained access to a system. We've seen that tick up lately as well. And ultimately, it's a big business that continues to grow. So the $billion, sorry, these apparently got copied in the same fashion from the previous one. But ultimately, like I mentioned, Chainalysis does a excellent report on an annual basis showing what they can track to Bitcoin wallets associated with addresses from ransom notes. Over $1 billion a year. It's not really going anywhere. So we've seen some other trends here. The healthcare thing is huge. We saw change. We saw a lot of other smaller hospital networks being impacted by ransomware over the past this quarter and the previous 3 quarters as well, the entire year. And some of the other ones that we've seen are counties like Clay County having to declare a disaster that actually halted some of their city services, the courthouse, probation. That type of knock-on effect, it ratchets up the pain on the victim organization to pay as quickly as possible, but ultimately it impacts all of us. When we go and look at any of the healthcare things, if a hospital portion of their systems are down due to a ransomware attack, people can't get the right medications. They may have to revert to paper charting. There's ambulance diversion where ERs need to, basically turn away ambulances and have them go to other hospitals, maybe ones that are less specialized in trauma or ones that are further away. So the knock-on effects of ransomware impacts normal everyday people. We've seen just in the first half, $460 or so million. So a little bit of an increase. Again, this data looks back, and this is only until the second half. So once the year ends, we'll have some more reporting in kind of the first month or two on some of the other, was this more than $1 billion trackable or less, or is it on track to grow in what percentage? We saw a record ransomware payment as well, Dark Angels with 75 million from some unnamed company. This one's been definitely speculative, but this is something we were trying to track. This would set the high watermark, if you could call it that, of a ransom payment, at least a demand. But there's definitely plenty of chatter about that payment being paid. We can't confirm that, and we don't know which company that was associated with either. But it kind of shows you that there's really some big fish that these groups are going after. Ransomware payment banning is always a topic. Realistically, there's a lot of different variables that go into banning a victim organization from paying a ransomware bounty or just a ransom. Would that stop things? Yes and no. Ultimately, would any ban be skirted by using an intermediary or having the payout delivered by somebody else? We're not sure, but so far we don't see any movement in ransom payments themselves, unless that payment most likely is directly attributable to somebody who is on a restricted list. We don't see that happening in the near-term future. A lot of the victims we see continue to be re-victimized post incident. So at least when we ran a couple of surveys this past year, 3/4 of them who were hit with ransomware were hit multiple times. So I think the mentality there for these groups is, if they were good for the first squeeze, they're good for the second squeeze. And unfortunately, that seems to be the case. We also saw we don't have an exact percentage of it, but we did see a definable sort of double-digit, at least, percentage of decryptors that were given out post ransomware payment that didn't actually work. There's a lot that goes into that, and certain groups are more customer-centric, I guess, than others. But we did see a number of decryptors or folks that did pay that did not get any of their data back, or did not get a decryptor that worked with the keys. We also saw in the data exfiltration kind of bucket over almost 3 billion records exposed. I think at this point, everybody in the world's data has been leaked in some form or fashion. We saw an uptick in some of the medical reports and records being leaked. This is pretty concerning for sure. There was 600 gigs of stolen data from a hospital sold. That's private medical information. We had an instance as well that we noted that there were sort of pre-op cancer patient type of surgical photos that were released in one breach, which led to a civil lawsuit as well. So there are so many knock-on effects from these data leaks that are very hard to model in real time, and we only see them in what comes out the other end from some of these campaigns. Again, more exfiltration and more impact to any kind of Department of Health and healthcare networks we've seen are been such a huge target recently. NHS data as well, but these groups have definitely figured out that hospitals are a mishmash of technologies, that they are environments that have a mix of maybe brand new systems and 30-year-old systems, and they're very complex and are kind of rife for exploitation. So unfortunately, we definitely have seen more focus on healthcare from these attack groups. Some of the other trends, and kind of we'll end up. I think we have maybe 1 or 2 slides here. We'll take some questions. But organizations, if you saw the CDK breach that happened, maybe this is 2-3 months ago. It all sort of blends together, but we're starting to see the CDK, I believe, was the provider of software for auto dealerships, and ultimately it impacted the ability for those dealerships to function to take services claims and things like that. And so we're starting to see, again, what is the fallout from that if you're the source of a problem and your ransomware in your company is not able to work, but you're relied on by multiple other companies, you definitely could face lawsuits. Um, the continuing fallout from the Change Healthcare incident is huge. This has been probably will go down in 2024 as probably the most impactful breach, but continue fallout for lawsuits from every organization impacted in this supply chain from that incident. We'll see how that tracks over the next year or so. Those lawsuits obviously take quite a bit of time to work their way through legal systems. But really more of the same, right? So more legal and regulatory repercussions. The LVN, the Lehigh Valley Health Network one, I believe that was the one that had the cancer patient. Correct me, I could be wrong. That I believe is the one that had the patient data photos that were released as well. But ultimately, class action lawsuit was filed against them. So these legal and regulatory repercussions continue to ratchet up. And if you notice, a lot of these tend to be healthcare. And I think that's not, I think there's a reason for that, is that the pressure on these particular groups, knowing that they have so much regulation that governs data privacy, is in part why we continue to see a lot of impacts and a lot of targets for healthcare. Definitely have seen a bit of an uptick from some of the North Korean attackers. There's actually just one release this week about targeting a splinter group or an affiliate with ties to some of the North Korean actors. Had breached an advertising firm focused in South Korea and had a pretty slick campaign on using malicious ad injection by targeting this agency or this firm itself. More ESXi, again, VMware ESXi definitely is one of the top topics of the year in ransomware itself. And most of those groups themselves have at least attempted to target it. Cicada is mentioned here. We don't have them, I believe, on the malicious quartile brand new group. I'm sure they will be making waves and make an appearance, I'm sure, on our next quarterly report as well. CISA continues to be kind of a guiding voice. There was a new alert that they put out about initial access brokers or at least really breaching as much critical infrastructure as they possibly could to do what they do, right? So whether that access is used by them or used and sold on by affiliates, TBD. I want to kind of stop there. I think we are, let's see, I think we have, 15 minutes left in the session, 10 minutes left. I want to point out just a couple of resources for folks. So we at Halcyon, obviously, we talk a lot about ransomware being an anti-ransomware platform. There's a few things that folks could find interesting. The malicious quartile, kind of that I just went over, the first 10 slides of this, is available on our website on halcyon.ai. And I actually just had the link changed to halcyon.ai/groups, I believe. But if you go to our site in the resources section, there's the power rankings. That is the top ransomware groups report. That one is super fresh. Again, we just put that one out this week. So all that data in there is very, very, very new. We also have a ransomware attacks map. Now, this map is updated on a weekly basis. It pulls from data leak aggregators, a variety of different sources, public and private, as well as any kind of publication. So whether it's on Bleeping Computer or makes its way up to another publication, we pull that data in and we map that attack, try to map it to a group if they're named, and a victim organization as well if they're publicly leaked. It's an interesting tool to see if others in your industry, in your area, are targeted by the same groups. We definitely recommend checking that out. It's ransomwareattacks.halcyon.ai. Again, that's also linked in our website, halcyon.ai, under the resources section. We also have a blog. And that blog has a couple of interesting ransomware-centric news items, aside from just Halcyon news in general. The first would be our Threat Insights report, which we put out on a monthly basis. That's based on things that we're actually seeing in live environments. So that's not open source intelligence. That's proprietary data from us and from our customers that we've anonymized to give us a bit more insight aside from these data leak aggregators or public sources. That is available on our blog. We do it on a monthly basis. We show some of the most targeted verticals that we're actually seeing by our threat response team, and some other insights of interesting tidbits, TTPs, and some of the other things that defenders would find valuable to keep abreast of. Um, from there, I think I can kind of pause. I'll let Randall come back. And Randall, do we want to do Q&A? Where would you like to go? Randall's there. If you have anything you can always feel free to put things in the chat as well. It looks like Randall's coming back in.
Yeah, sorry, I struggled to find the get back to the webinar section.
It hides itself.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I think doing a Q&A session would be great.
Sure.
We've got a bunch of attendees here. There's a Q&A button at the bottom if you guys want to go ahead and ask questions. We can get those answered now.
Yeah, well, as we wait, we can have chat. What is Randall? What do you particularly find interesting about ransomware? Is it seems like it's everywhere at this point in time, and the industry has gone from viruses and malware to APT nation state, and now everywhere. A lot of the talk I see is around either ransomware or identity management, sort of the expanding cloud service of attacks. What's your take on the problem?
Well, obviously it's a huge problem. You can't read the newspaper these days without seeing the ransomware problem that folks are having to deal with. One area that is very interesting to me is the follow-on effects in the cyber insurance market, and how the overall industry's inability to deal with ransomware and potentially paying is causing follow-on effects to the entire industry, entire market, who is trying to get cyber insurance.
Yeah, that one's very interesting too. Cyber insurance isn't new, but it's kind of new. And what we've also seen too, and we've had some talks with providers, and a lot have seemed to move to require additional addendum policies to cover ransomware on top of their cyber insurance, right? So it's not, you don't get cyber insurance and get a free pass for ransomware. It's an additional thing with additional requirements to audit, additional hoops to jump through. It's a weird balancing act where I believe a lot of the providers pay out a very significant portion of their claims. And so it's difficult for cyber insurance providers to quantify the risk and controls that need to go into place. And it's also difficult for the end user and customers who hold these policies, who see continual requirements have to get ratcheted up, as well as premiums paid on those policies. So it seems like it's not a good thing for anybody, whether you're a consumer of a cyber insurance policy or cyber insurance provider either. It's fire insurance in California, it's flood insurance in Florida. It's not really a fun market for anybody.
Well, that's also one of the big problems is the cyber insurance, or insurance companies in general, are not very technically astute. They don't have the capability to be able to understand exactly what it is they're underwriting. They don't do any analysis in terms of a particular organization's security posture. And so we're all left to suffer, when that happens.
Yeah, and we definitely have had some conversations and continue to have conversations with some large providers on trying to build that, because ultimately, the companies and private security vendors need to work hand in hand with insurance providers in order to quantify that risk. in order for them to understand it and the customer to understand it as well. But yeah, it's a bit Wild Westy still. We don't think it's going to go away. Ultimately, it's going to require this cross collaboration to get a model that works, so their actuarial data that they're making decisions on is accurate, that the controls that the security vendors and service providers have are adequate, and customers are also building their programs to account for any gaps in ransomware protection.
Yep. We've got a question here, and I'm going to paraphrase a little bit. Have you ever seen a situation where a ransomware actor has taken some PII or HIPAA data from an individual, from an organization? The organization has refused to pay the ransom, and subsequently that information has been disclosed. Is the person who didn't pay the ransom ever on the hook for that breach?
Well, the breach didn't happen by paying. So we haven't. I can't think of of cases where that has happened. At least in the U.S. The breach has already happened. So if there's any liability, and I'm not a liability expert on that, when it comes to that type of thing, I would assume that it would be, are the compensating controls enough? Did they go through, are they appropriately, do they have the appropriate audits in place to prevent that from happening? The decision to pay a ransom, as I kind of mentioned a little bit earlier, CISA says probably shouldn't pay a ransom, but there's not like a ban on it unless you're actually sending that money to somebody who's on the OFAC list of restricted entities. But the decision to pay a ransom or not, I would be shocked if it leads to any kind of a lawsuit. Ultimately, you don't know if you're getting the data back. You don't know if that data is actually being, if a ransomware group holds your data for hostage and pays for it, maybe they'll pay for it a second time. Maybe they'll get some extra bucks on it from the dark web. So you kind of have to, you'd be taking their word that that data wasn't leaked subsequently, even though a ransom was paid.
Yeah.
Cool. Randall, anything else in the chat? Any other questions?
Not so far, and I think we're actually pretty close on time. Just gonna check and plug the next talk is on the state of SIEM. So it's I'll take a look at the whole EDR, XDR, SIEM market. What do they all mean? So everybody get ready for that talk, and I think we're going to be wrapped up here.
Awesome. Well, I appreciate it, Randall and the rest of the team at Fulcrum. Thank you so much. And let me know if you guys have any follow-on questions. Again, if you go to halcyon.ai, we've got all those resources up. If you want to dive into the world of ransomware, you're more than welcome. So appreciate the time.
Thank you, Ryan. Appreciate it.